It is later at night, so thanks for coming. But if you look outside, it doesn't look later than it is. And you're going to be very excited. So as the local organizers and executive committee began to plan this conference and whom to invite as our primary keynote speakers, both given the background experience of the horrors of COVID and given the focus of the conference on nature, I guess the horrors are probably not good to say this after that, but Claire Colebrook came immediately to mind, sending out an email into the pandemic void. We were so relieved, really. She said yes, and seemed very enthusiastic, thus helping us imagine that this all might actually happen. The Edwin Earl Sparks, professor of English at Penn State University in the Eastern U.S., Colebrook has for some time now been one of our most important philosophers and theorists of literature, guiding us whenever we think about the Anthropocene, the post-human, and creating new concepts in light of the ongoing horrors of the present. She wrote almost a decade ago in her wonderful Blake, Deleuzean Aesthetics and the Digital, a work that I adore, even though I'm not a scholar of Blake. I don't do Deleuzean aesthetics or even much of the digital. She wrote that I adore that book, the concepts are not created when we simply label already existing sets of probabilities. Rather, her work is inveterately an attempt to leave open space for the coming of the future, which is what I've taken from her writings, especially on Derrida. She says that instead, philosophy creates concepts that rupture the organism's boundedness, no longer organizing the world as though it were reducible to life's bodily needs and interests. Philosophy manages to create concepts that think beyond the actual inhuman concepts, such as the thought of the future or of the cosmos. Colebrook was first turned on to philosophy when she was working as a young cleaning woman for a labor politician. That's a whole allegory right there. Yeah, it says everything about labor. One night, the politician invited Peter Singer, the well-known utilitarian ethicist and well-known for other dubious things now, and early voice, more positively, for animal rights. Invited him over for dinner, and Colebrook says, he convinced me to become vegetarian, and I was completely struck with how he made the case. I decided to go back to uni and study philosophy, exclamation point. Raised outside of Melbourne, Australia, I assume where you went to high school, she attended the University of Melbourne, first as a music student, later graduating with Bachelor of Arts in Philosophy at Melbourne, and then a Bachelor of Letters in English Literature at Australian National University, so setting the stage for years later to be keynoting at a philosophy and literature conference. In the early 1990s, Colebrook earned her doctorate at the University of Edinburgh, and soon after gained renown as a close reader of literary texts and interpreter of philosophers such as Gilles Deleuze, as she took posts in literature, critical theory, and philosophy departments in Scotland, Australia, and eventually the United States. Colebrook's edited volumes, including Posthumous Life, Theorizing Beyond the Posthuman, with Jamie Weinstein, who is also here and will be part of the Close Encounter tomorrow, as well as previous works on Deleuze, Derrida, and ecology and life, have not just been CV boosters for fellow academics, but have been agenda setting for fellow thinkers inquiring into the inhuman condition all around us. Her single author works, such as the 2-volume Open Access, Death of the Posthuman series, and books such as Deleuze and the Meaning of Life, among other path-breaking works on Deleuze, Irony, and Philosophy of the Post-Structuralist Theory, Kant to Deleuze, bear witness to inhuman concepts of the future and the cosmos that so many of us in the Association for Philosophy and Literature have used to think about the topics of this conference on nature. We will hear much more about all this tomorrow in the Close Encounter, on her work just after lunch, so we keep putting you after meals, in this very room. Anyone who's read her work on the human inhuman and animality and the post-human knows all of this might be a very long and continued response to Singer so many years ago. I asked her recently what she thinks links her writings, which are such a range of thinkers and topics, but are clearly tied to an ongoing project. I think what links everything I've written, she said, is the question of how we justify living to ourselves and to others. She continues that inexhaustible project tonight with a paper titled Destiny and the Human, Anthropos as Virtual Object. Please help me welcome Claire Colebrook.
Okay, thanks so much for inviting me. I'll just lower it to short person levels. Okay, thank you. Some bad news, but some good news. The bad news is this is a 7,000 word written paper. The good news is you're going to love it. No, the good news is I'm going to skate over huge chunks of it. So I'll just mention what I'm not going to go into detail about. As an overview of where I'm going to argue for two conceptions of history. One which is liberal, and I know we all use that word too easily as sort of bad, but that's how I'm using it. Liberal meaning where we are now is at the end of a history of progress and perfection, versus stratigraphic where we see where we are now as completely contingent. It might not have been, it's certainly not inevitable, and it's certainly not the only way of living. That's one part through the paper. And the second is because it's a philosophy and literature conference, I'm going to link two quotations. This is just, the PowerPoint is arbitrarily on Byron. It's this quotation from Difference and Repetition and this quotation from Mary Shelley's The Last Man, written in 1826 about a global pandemic that leaves everyone except for the last man. But I'm just going to go back and leave that inscription from Byron because it's about Byron's dog. So obviously you just leave that up there, right? Talk is about two conceptions of history. Why not just have a picture of a tombstone to a dog? So anyway, to talk about this two conceptions of history, there's that famous moment in Freud, and I think it is a famous moment, where he talks about the three narcissistic blows that humans have received. First, the Copernican revolution, when humans realise they're not the centre of the universe. Second, Darwin, when they're not the centre of creation. And then Freud, even though he's talking about narcissism, third one is Freud, he's the third great narcissist. But I'm contesting that because, and I'm not a Darwin scholar at all, but if you read The Origin of Species, it concludes with that famous phrase or section on life's grandeur. And Darwin says, every moment of extinction gives a way to another stage of perfection, moving on. And one can imagine God's breath of life giving creation its birth, and every extinction, every end is the pathway to a new beginning. It's not teleological, everything is accidental, but each accident finds its way towards perfection. And that conception of life's grandeur, I want to argue, is the dominant conception in Anthropocene discourse, where it's true that where we are now, let's call it late capitalism, liberal humanism, global democracy, sort of fragile. It's true that that might not have happened, but once it occurs, once you arrive at late capital liberal humanism, it's possible to look back and understand other social forms as not yet quite on their way to capitalism or democracy, right? So there's nothing essential, necessary, or inevitable about where we are, but once we've got here, the past makes sense in a way that the past never did to itself. It's once you arrive at capitalism, you can see pre-capitalist social forms as not having got there yet, but it was always hovering at the border. In the same way, the Anthropocene is a geological epoch. There's nothing essential about where we are now, but once we've created catastrophic climate change, there's nothing universal about humanity until we're all stuck in this common predicament of being about to go extinct. So that's a first section of Darwin that I'm skipping over. But what I'm drawing from that is an accidental negative universal history. It might not have happened, but once it has, it's inescapable and it completely allows for an explanation of the past. So the Anthropocene poses the question of time and history, both as a mark in the present that discloses a past and as a confrontation with geological strata that indicates an end. Once you look at the layers of history and see humans, and you see other layers of history, it implies that there will be other layers. We're but one layer, among others. The Darwinian time of proliferating and fruitful difference gives way to a stratigraphic time of ends, while also placing the human within rather than at the culmination of time. It's as though an inscription from the past cuts into the sense of forward destiny and acts as a letter of termination. That's how I'm reading the Anthropocene. It's you're fired, humans. Like, it's your end. It's not sure when it begins, we're not sure when it ends, but that there will be an end. Destiny is split into two incompatible senses. Even if one accepts that humanity and capitalist modernity might not have come into being, it appears that once capitalist humanism arrives, it is possible to see prior history as leading up to a present in which a universal we is formed that is capable of reading history in general. Footnote to Dipesh Chakrabarty, who made a sort of conversion statement when he was a post-colonial historian, arguing that there were multiple senses of the human in different histories, and then he says the Anthropocene changes all that. We're now in a common predicament. We were always, once you look back, you can see we were always going to end up in that common predicament because of climate change. We're facing a fragile future with the only way forward now being a global, universal, and technologically mature avoidance of existential risk. If one regards anthropos, the anthropos of the Anthropocene, as a past leading to who we have become, then it is indeed readable as a negative universal history. However varied and open the past may have been, we have now arrived at a point of recognition of the processes of the whole and must understand ourselves as a single species inhabiting the earth in common. So that's one possibility, negative universal history. Alternatively, this is where I come in, rather than anthropos or climate change or capitalism situating us at the end of a forward movement that then requires us some form of adjustment to continue, a quite different we is produced through a capacity to mark out our species as a geological event. In fact, maybe this picture of a tombstone isn't so arbitrary after all, because it's looking at one's own tombstone, which is what I think the Anthropocene is a capacity to imagine something other than us. That might be human or human-like. There is the we of the species, although layers of technology are required. So there's, when one looks at ourselves as a species, that requires huge technological, temporal sophistication. To grasp humans as a species is a technological event. One has to have history, archives, geological, scientific, biological discourses, apparatuses to have a sense of the human. So there are not only several technological candidates that mark the beginning of the Anthropocene. Is it intensive agriculture? Is it capitalism? Is it colonialism? Is it industrialised slavery? Is it white settler culture? Is it nuclear energy? So all those candidates have been included in what counts as the Anthropocene. There's also other candidates that count for the tech. What does it take to be able to read ourselves as a species? Does it need a practice like geology? Does it need genetics? Does it need the human sciences? Does it need the biological sciences? However, whatever that is, the thought of extinction, or us looking at our own tombstone, has now taken on a different sense. This is what I want to consider by looking at this moment, which you may or may not be able to read, from Mary, The Last Man, written in 1826. For those of you who haven't read the novel, or for those of you for whom it's been a while since you've read it, the novel begins with two unnamed travellers moving through Italy in 1815. And the tour guide says, oh, you don't want to go there, oh, you don't want to go any further, you don't want to go there. And they go, oh, we'll go there. and they go into this cave. They go into a cave. On the cave floor, there's all these leaves. And if you pick up one of them, it's the French Revolution. If you pick up the other one, it's Nero. Oh, look, this is Constantinople. Right? There's every moment in history, Chinese, all these different languages. You pick up this one leaf, and this leaf is someone telling you about the end of the human species in 2100. And that's the novel. So the novel begins with someone in 1815 picking up a letter from the future that says, you're all going to die. And you're not just going to die like eons away. The novel is then narrated in pretty much a Britain that looks like Mary Shelley's Britain, except now there's no royal family, which is more implausible than the end of the human species, right? It's easier to imagine the end of everything than the end of the British royal family. But she sets it in a world. What makes the novel so traumatic to read is it's not happening to them, it's happening to us. You know, it's not, we all know humans are going to go extinct, right? We all know that the planet's going to die. But if you're told it's going to die in, I don't know, 2500, that's possibly tolerable, right? 2100, like, I don't have children, so therefore I don't have grandchildren, but some of my friends do, right? 2100 is a big deal, right? And it's the day Mary Shelley chooses to say, you're all going to die then. And so the world that's about to end is not those people, it's us. That's the point I'm trying to make, right? It's that we're all happy to accept those people die. We do it every day of our lives, right? With genocides that we don't pay attention to and things like that. But what happens when that death sentence, and I'm not saying that's right, right? That's not, oh look, but it's those people over there. No, that's the problem, right? Of imagining one's own end and how individuating that is. Mary Shelley imagines it in 2100. I want to compare this novel to what happens if you look at the last IPCC report. And if you don't have to read it closely, it basically says you keep doing this, and 2100 is the year that they choose if climate change policy stays as it is and we do what we say we're going to do, so that we don't do any more than we say we're going to do, but we do what we say we're going to do, 2100 we're toast, right? So the difference this makes, right? Obviously, it makes practical difference, like how we think on a day-to-day level. But what I want to look at is what temporal shift has to happen before the extinction of the species becomes something that happens to us. Now, I'm not going to be alive in 2100. Thankfully, right, is how I see it. But being able to witness the human as a geological event is clearly political, right, as contestations of the very concept of Anthropocene make. It's the capitalocene, it's the white plantationocene, it's the so on. But geology's collision with history is more importantly an existential event that opens the question of who we are. I'm afraid I'm going to mention Heidegger, but I'll do it once and I think I'll get away with it. So there is, as Heidegger argued, a direct relationship between death and individuation. If I am going to be able to live forever, then eventually I'm going to be Beyonce, Jack Halberstam, Donald Trump, you know, those three names that just come to mind. If I live forever, then I go through all those, but I am not going to live forever. So that is what you know, I can be this, but I can't be a mathematician, right? I had to end up being a queer theorist or a basketball player, whatever, right? So that's very clear that having an end individuates you when you're a human body and your death is an organic event, right? When does the end of humanity occur? Like, when do we say, this is the end of the world? What I'm trying to suggest is the backward glance at the Anthropocene. Did it begin with intensive agriculture? Did it begin with industrialization? What did it take for us to be the humans that we now are, right? And what would we have to give up? Or at what point do we start to say, whoa, that's not us anymore, right? And I think when extinction was an abstract event, like I don't know how old you have to be for most of my life I probably didn't have a sense of human extinction, right? Like it's not, like I even remember when I started writing about it, this is what everyone says, when I started writing about it, no one was writing about it. But it wasn't that long ago that it was really crazy to think about the end of humans, right? Now everyone's doing it, but, you know, like, the point I'm making, or trying to make, is that it becomes urgent when there's a sense of existential recognition. Right? When those people who die, they'll be living lives like us, or they'll gradually not be living lives like us. That's probably more the point. So determining when Anthropos of the Anthropocene begins does not decide the end, but it does indicate an acceleration of ends, right? Like we're becoming geological, and geology is moving really quickly. If Anthropos can transform the Earth as a living system, doing so within narratable human history, then its end is no longer some far-off vanishing event. The Anthropocene splits the human in two while also dividing the end. There's the human that's the species, which is probably going to live beyond 2100. I don't know, right? Who can predict? There's the species, but what is going to survive after 2100 something that we would recognise? So there's a short time frame, and I'm just choosing that year because it's the same year that Mary Shelley predicted. But if you read IPCC, there's optimistic scenarios where it's 2200, so it's probably not your grandkids, so you can stop worrying. But I say that flippantly, but I think people think if it's their grandkids, they panic. If it's their great, yeah, you know, buy another SUV. So the 21st century would not be the first occasion for recognising the existential impact of confronting one's own non-being. Roy Scranton wrote a book, Learning to Die in the Anthropocene. Like, the most dignified thing we can do is not, like, geoengineer our way out of this, but accept death, philosophically. He got a lot of flack about that from the left, saying, you know, like, no, it's not we accepting to die, it's white, hyper-consuming capitalism that is killing the rest of the world. It's, you know, it shouldn't be learning to die. I think that's a misreading of the spirit of what he was trying to do, which is to say, when you confront your end, you should be asking about how you might live otherwise. Right? And so that the backward glance at history, where one might say, it doesn't have to be like this, right? There are, who we are is not the entirety of the possibility of being human. So now I want to talk about what it is to face this end existentially. As I said, to live as if one were already dead, and perhaps isn't that a nice topic while everyone else is watching the hockey? We're in here talking about what it's like to be already dead. Whereas when you're watching hockey, it's live, right? So, what does it mean to live knowing that there is an end, right? And I think that's where we are now. Maybe it's not 2100, maybe I'm just being miserable, maybe it's 2200, right? But it's starting to be affectively real, right? That this will be something humans like us go through. And one could say that humans like us are going through those things now. I think that's not like that are witnessing or feeling the end of. There's two ways this can go. One, the one I'm trying to push for, is I'm going to call it stoic, cynical, in a sense that I'll hope I'll make sense of before it gets too late. A stoic, cynical sense of being able to live, and this is maybe, we've been having talks about queer futures and time, right? Without a time that's going to be redemptive, right? Like, not, if we geoengineer our way out, we'll save the world. What it's like to live without the possibility of saving the world. You know, what's the ethical possibility? And one is, no, you just have to save the world. The other is to be able to say goodbye to one's world and imagine another type of world. What would that mean concretely? Like degrowth, right? Not everyone can have a smartphone and a laptop and spend conferences in very nice hotels. So to live as if one's already dead has, as I've already mentioned, a long philosophical history. Stoic, Buddhist, Sophoclean, I would say Freudian. Freud is about being able to face the tragedy of existence. But something about facing one's end, something has happened to that in the Anthropocene. It's become highly privatised. So I wanted to see when I was, for want of a better word, researching this paper, what was happening with contemporary forms of Stoic and Buddhist ethics. And the things that came to the fore was there were 10 insanely useful Stoic life hacks, which I got off BuzzFeed. So 1, 2, step 10. But also Stoic and Buddhist, there were like so many 10 useful Stoic things. And it was all about how we can cope with climate change and catastrophe and pandemics and things like that. In fact, it becomes highly privatised. That it's imagined as an opportunity to hold on to one's own being through disaster. I mean, that's one way you can think about Stoicism, right? There's nothing, there's nothing I can do. Stop watching the news. It's not happening. I'm not doom scrolling anymore. I'm going to manage my way out of it. What I want to think about is a non-privatised version of cynical Stoicism. Can I add another word? Non-privatised cynical Stoicism when you make the t-shirt. Just make sure. Because imagining our end, I want to see what it would be like to witness the end and to think about this end existentially, is to think the end of privatisation. Not just privatisation as, which it would be really good if we could get rid of privatisation as in what we all experience in our university life. Like even if you're at a state institution, it's highly privatised. There's fees, knowledge is privatised, grading is privatised, everything we do, right? But I want to think about privatisation. It is an economic, political state event. But this is also where I get onto, I wouldn't be here, right, if I couldn't do some Deleuze. This is where I get onto my Deleuze shtick. Privatisation as a metaphysical and existential event, right? That once we have come into being as who we are, we have an attachment to who we are, right? It's existential, right? It's your life, therefore you have an investment in it, more or less, right? We currently have an investment, an intense investment in privatised life. Before I look at difference and repetition, I'm just going to use, like I was talking to Jamie, I'm like, which bit of this paper do I read? Stuff on Anti-Oedipus? No, skip over that. Thousand Planet? No, skip over that. But I am going to talk this one phrase from Anti-Oedipus, which is privatisation of the organs. And it sounds really abstract, but we're doing it all the time. Most of my anti-music comes from this. There would have been a time not that long ago, and for most of human culture, most of your music was experienced collectively, right? Most art was experienced collectively. Now, most art is experienced privately. That's what I take privatisation of the organs to be. It's folded. I do prefer listening to my music this way and reading my books this way, but the point I'm trying to make is imagining the end of it would for me be the end of the world, right? But it's not the end of the world, right? It's the end of my world. So here's where I wanted to, this is a passage from Difference and Repetition, where Deleuze talks about destiny. And so this is where I'm going to actually talk about the title of my talk, which is The Human as a Virtual Object. There's the quotation for those of you who think I'm making stuff up, which I am, right? But the quotation comes in this really dense, difficult, I've heard so many papers at conferences about Deleuze's syntheses of time and repetition, and I've fallen asleep in all of them, and now I'm going to do it again. But there's this whole discussion of the pure past, right? And it keeps talking about the pure past. Here's my hot take on it. Every actuality brings something into being that could have happened out of all these things that were possible, have always been possible. So where we are now was always possible, right? We are actualizations of something that was always possible, right? There's other many possible things that don't happen, right? That is the first step in deprivatizing where we are. Where we are is not inevitable. Does not have absolute value. It is not a prima facie worth, right? My life is, if I take on a perspective outside the privatization of my existence, it is not of supreme, it's more valuable to me, right? But it's clearly not more valuable to you than your own life. Assuming no one's going to lay down their life for me right now. But you probably will by the time I get to the conclusion. So the first step is this, Deleuze makes this long section of the pure past, but he's talking about the formation of the ego, like how we become who we are. And we are nothing more than our, he says perceptions, but it's attachments. I go through life and I accrue perceptions, I attach myself, I like this, I don't like that, I like that. There's nothing necessary or inevitable about it, but once it's happened, it's who I am, and I can't I really wished I hadn't turned out, I really wished I'd become a mathematician, you can say that, but then, if I say right now, I really wish I were Beyonce, what do I really mean? Because she doesn't already exist, how much would I have to, a lot to change to be Beyonce, right? But the point being is when one says that, one's imagining, and what are you imagining? Brain transportation, right? Somewhere anyway. The point being is that you are just those predicates that you've become attached to, and once they're there, they seem inevitable. Deleuze is making this point at this stage, right? Differences, repetitions before he hooks up with Guattari, he's making this about the individual self. Later in his work, he's making it about humanity. We just happen to have accrued all these attachments. By the time we get to capitalism, it's so this is who we are, right? This is humanity. We are, that's what capitalism does. It operates by making what is contingent look necessary and what is necessary look contingent. Capitalism, if you're in a lousy job, it's because you're stupid. If I'm in a good job, it's because I'm clever. That was inevitable, right? It does that. And then capitalism itself is inevitable, right? It had to be this way. This is the only fair system. There is no other way. Capitalism is both the making necessary of the contingent and then privatizing that necessity, right? If you're where you are, it's your fault, right? And if we're here where we are, it's, if America's a democracy, because it totally is, it's because, we're the best. And if America's both a democracy and the strongest economy in the world and the world's police force, it's because we're the best, right? And we won, and those poor people over there haven't got... That's what capitalism does. It does it at a global level, it does it at an individual. It makes where you are now seem as the inevitable outcome of a past that could have been completely different, right? And because we are that outcome, right, individually and globally, existentially it's hard to imagine it's otherwise. So, for example, if we try and think of stateless societies, for example, right, without capitalism and without the internet, it seems like the end of the world. That's how we always imagine the end of the world. But this takes me to the quotation from Deleuze. So I'm going to try and conclude soon because I know it's late. Destiny never consists in step-by-step deterministic relations between presents which succeed one another according to the order of a represented time. Rather, it implies between successive presents non-localizable connections, actions at a distance, systems of replay, resonance and echoes, objective chances, signs, signals and roles, which transcend spatial locations and temporal successions. What the hell? We say of successive presents which express a destiny, they always play out the same thing, the same story, but at different levels. Here more or less relaxed, there more or less contracted. This is why, this is the bit I made sense of all the difference and repetition for me. This is why destiny accords so badly with determinism, but so well with freedom. If you could look at, like, that's what I think the Anthropocene offers us. Like, it's over, right? At some point it plays itself out. We know that. It's destined. How would we act? Do we still cling to who we are? Like, you know, if you look at the IPCC report, it's about how many cars we can continue to drive, how many airplanes, how much fracking we can continue to do. It's all a gamble on holding on to who we are, right? Not to trash the IPCC, that's their job, right? How many adjustments do we have to make to hold on to who I am? What would happen if instead of looking at stateless societies as, oh my God, we might end up as a stateless society, one could imagine like this notion of destiny, like imagining that it's over. There's a certain freedom in that, right? It's not American freedom, it's not the freedom to own a gun. What's the other freedom to stop other people voting? I can't remember the other one. Now that I'm a citizen, I can say these things. I used to always worry I'd get deported. So this is actually what I wanted to conclude with. So I've already mentioned Mary Shelley's The Last Man. The novel concludes with Lionel, who's the last man, who's decided, the first part of the novel is about who gets to govern England, Britain, and then it ends up with Lionel, who was just watching power games play out in, he writes 2100 and walks off with his dog. This is you can see where my side hustle is. I'm a canine companion. My other sort of concluding moment, this is where I want to talk about cynical stoicism at the end of the world. Byron's Darkness is, I haven't strictly counted the lines, I think it's about a 100-line poem, something like that. He spends 10 of those lines, so 10% of the poem, if we're doing that sort of type of reading, describing a dog. So this is why I'm concluding. Okay, so Byron's Darkness, for those of you who have not read it, the sun has died, and Byron is responding at the time to a prophecy that the sun was going to die. Right? Someone had predicted the sun. It was like in the news. And he imagines, literally, the sun's dead, we've eaten everything, we're now burning everything to keep ourselves warm because the sun's died, right? So you need to burn libraries, pillars, temples, churches, which for Byron is like something you really want to set fire to. All of it. There's two people left at the end, and they're burning stuff to stay alive, and they look into each other's faces and die. So because that's what the end of the world would be for Byron. Like, do you at the end of the world, that's one possibility, see other humans as horror and die? Because that's where we are now, right? That's what we're living. Other humans, everything is competitive, the other person is about to take everything from you, and the end of the world will be you struggling with that last person, right? That's one image in darkness. The other is of a dog, and Literally, humans are eating each other. The meager by the meager were devoured. Even dogs assail their masters, all save one. So this is what I like about this poem. It's not like dogs are awesome. No, most of the dogs are still eating, right? It's not dogs are better than humans, you know, we're all eating each other and the dogs are like, no thanks, I'll wait for my kibble. There's one dog that decides he's not playing that game. Right? His master's dead, everyone's eating each other, and he just decides, I'm not going to do that. Right? For no reason other than just decency. Right? So Byron has these two images at the end. Do you struggle for competition till the end? Like, look at the other human and die with horror? Or is there a certain freedom in witnessing the end and not doing all you can to save yourself? But being able, it's interesting, the dog is just looking at the life of another human with respect, not horror. Just trying to see if I will say any more. Here's my page, right. So this is my last, so now this is my last paragraph and then we'll go and play hockey. How in 2022 can humanity justify going on? More importantly, how can humanity imagine going on? Except that who we are now has always ended. That what might become is given in a humanity that is elsewhere. That's what I'm trying to suggest, right? I'm not celebrating the end of humans. I'm suggesting that what is mournful for us is not mournful for all humans and may not be mournful for humans to come. So this differs temporally and technically from liberalism. It's not that humanity bears a future irreducible to what it has been. I'm not doing this Derrida, the future is yet to come, we can't imagine the future, because the future's not already given, who knows what's there. That's not where I'm going. Rather, it's that one might live this humanity as something already gone, already absent, already missing, and past. That's what I mean by it as a virtual object. The humanity we've invested in has never existed, right? There's never been this global, democratic, benevolent humanism. It's never existed. It's there for us to keep justifying our existence. But nothing that exists now, none of the attachments that produce who we are, has to be. How might we think of ourselves in the absence of who we are? This has quite concrete implications. I just finished reading Jonathan Prairie's very grumpy Scorched Earth, which insists that there is no human future of the internet. Like, that's got to go because it just turns us in all on ourselves. But perhaps more optimistically, David Graeber and David Wengrow's New History of Humanity, in which instead of saying human history as moving towards capitalism, they see it's really like every human society was trying to avoid state societies and capitalism, right? And you see it. I mean, I don't want to fetishize the Amish that I live near, but you see them desperately trying to hold off from becoming capitalist and state societies. And rather than capitalism being this necessary end that everyone ought to have got to, it was something that people struggled not to arrive at, state forms of capitalism. That's what I'm suggesting by like relativizing and saying goodbye to who we are. There are other virtual objects, not necessarily a global and universal sense of who we are, so much as the sense of a fragmented humanity that resists state forms and that might always also not be. Thank you.
The human and the animal in the poem, and you suggested like not all dogs in the poem are bad. There's one good dog, something like that.
Yeah.
But isn't this dog the dumb dog that like shouldn't you be devouring your masters and eating them because there's nothing else to eat? This dumb dog doesn't devour his master. And what does he get for it? He licks the hand that presumably feeds him, which is answered not with a caress, he died.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm just thinking about this relationship between animal and human, which, you know, as I've suggested is like really banalized by the pet dynamic, as this poem makes very clear. There's nothing in it for the animal, nothing
No, right.
at all, as
Yeah.
there is nothing in it for the animal here. So in these imaginaries in which humans are going to die out, isn't there another order for animals that are not human?
Right. So I think the interesting thing about it, at least for that poem, I mean, I actually then, I know you wanted to stay with this, but that was his, tombstone to his dog, and he basically said, everyone I knew sucked, but you were actually a good. I think it's more that there's nothing, I want to suggest there's nothing species invested in Byron in this. He basically thinks everyone sucks, right? And there's these few glimmers of people who don't, and some of those people are dogs, right? And some of those people are humans. Now, so that's part of it, right? So there were I went to some interesting talks on animals, like that's not where this is, right? But there's the other thing you're saying, which is different, right, is domestication, right? Because one of the things I'm interested in is privatization, right? And one of the things that, if this were a romanticism, I'm going to talk, Mary Shelley talks about, The Last Man is about privatization. It's about someone who was just running around the forest killing, he's poaching, right, and just refusing the order of things and not doing domesticated animals and not doing, right, and he learns to become civil, right, and falls in love with all these proper men, right, and the novel, so Mary Shelley's novel, that actually was a disaster, right? And it almost ends, so I think, I'd never really thought about, this is like a sort of implicit, like it's a domestic, look at what you've done to this poor domesticator. But I think Byron's never thought of that. I think Mary Shelley actually was like implicitly that whole novel, like there's other, it's like the world of loneliness, right? There's other, but it is implicitly a counter-domestic novel, because domestic spaces are spaces of death, right? And so it's true that at the end of the novel it's him and his dog, but they're going off, right, wandering. Now, is the dog a pet? Well, that's, you've done all that. It gets to the point where, at that point, if there's only two beings left on the earth, and one of them's human and one of them's a dog, are they pets, right? Like, you've destroyed domestication because you've destroyed domesticity. And that's what Mary Shelley, like, she can't see a future in political domestic life. So, yeah.
What else? If no one else has questions, I'm going to start talking about Star Trek. Is that?
No, thank God.
That's all I can think
Oh.
Thanks so much for your talk. I was hoping you might say a little bit more about the Stoicism and about the cynicism.
Yeah.
So that's literally
You
all.
were just hoping
Yeah, just in the sense of like why those two terms, because I think you can
Right.
call this something else.
Yes.
Why those two things?
Because the first is I was trying to think about just Deleuze, like trying to make sense of Deleuze, right? And that and difference in repetition. I'm thinking, where's he going with this, right? Like just like as you like, because there's the technical stuff, but what's his investment in this? And Stoicism was my way of, because it's sort of a history of philosophy book, right? Difference in repetition is him placing himself in the history of philosophy. What's he trying to do with this? And the way I could make sense of it was in a tradition of Stoicism that, and someone who's an expert on Stoicism review, right? A detachment, a sense of cultivating a detachment from one's own attachments, right? Now, why I went through cynicism more, right? Because I think that both Mary Shelley and Byron with dogs were playing on the cynic, right? Like being dog-like, right? And maybe that goes back to Jackson, like dog-like in your devotion. Like there's no reason, like there's no foundation for it. You can't justify it, right? This is just the commitment I have and what it might be to live without foundations, right? So that's why I chose those terms because, you know, now and then I started to look in, well, is there any work done on romanticism and stuff? There's not. I looked, right? You know, and it's easy to look now, right? And there's not, but I felt that might be a different way of reading. This was also the year, you know, everyone talks about Byron's Darkness is the year without a summer. People thought the world was going to end. There was a pandemic and climate change, right? They're living through that. This is, you know, Darwin hasn't yet, there's not evolution, there's extinction, right? So Darwin, by the time to get to Darwin, he's saying, well, extinction, yeah, but extinction is moving. No, they've only got extinction, they haven't got evolution, right? So they've got ends and they've got no beginnings. And my bet, right, I have to now do more work on this, is that, and I've done some work on Blake and Stoicism, I think that there's an interest in, you know, a rejection of Christian, like a apocalyptic romanticism of redemption, and some Stoic acceptance that how does one live at the end? That's my bet, right? That's what I think. Then when, you know, once you have one of these guys, every novel is about that, right? Like that's what I think Frankenstein is about. That's what I think Jane Austen is about, like living without a future. Yeah, so that's.
Thank you for a lovely talk. Question. When I think about the slow violence of climate change, I think about the proverbial frogs in the water that begins to boil. And I think about the Leonardo DiCaprio film, the title of which I can't remember.
Don't Look Up.
That one?
Yeah.
Don't Look Up. And I wonder if it's ever possible for us to grasp or comprehend our finitude as a species. Is it an impossible endeavor?
So I think so this is what I was trying to hint at. Like I think we must have, like, you know, I had a normal education, right, where I wasn't taught creation, like I was taught evolution, right? So we must have had some vague notion that humans become extinct, right? Or we have some notion, you know, they used to do that thing, you know, we are but 1 second on the clock of geological time, right? And like that didn't. Maybe that's all, you know. Stephen Hawking says it's awe-inspiring. Whatever, it's just 1 second on the clock. But so my short answer is no, we don't. We can't comprehend it. But now we are actually getting letters from the future, right? The IPCC is saying, you read it and you say, we can't really, you read it, you're like, holy cow. It's going to be people like me, right? It's not going to be those humans in 500 years, right? I think you're right. Like just as, you know, that was why I quoted Heidegger. He says, well, you know, we all know everyone dies someday, right? Do you really? Well, there are times in your life when you do, right? As you get older, you do, right? When choices diminish, you do, right? And Heidegger says that in an individual. You can't always go individual species analogies, right? Because they're not analogies, because it's very clear when I die, right? And you're right, it's hard to grasp, but I think we are at a point where we are grasping it, right? That we have to start thinking about that, right? And that notions of growth and like global prosperity. I mean, I know because of where I am that no one believes in that, right? But people do believe, right, in growth and prosperity, and still use the third world as though it can be included, right? And I think there are now, and so when you say that, no, but recent, like last IPCC report is a threshold change, right? They always say there's this window of hope because that's their job, right? Well, no one's going to, like, sorry, this report you wanted, you're not going to want another one. You know, like, so they will say, like, if you do, right? And it's true, right? There's things we can do to make it 2200, right? But I mean, I flew here, like probably most people, and United has this, we're carbon free by 20, like on my little napkin with my drink, we're carbon free by, carbon neutral by 2050. I really just felt like 2050? You think you're going to be flying United in 2050? Like that's how pessimistic I am, because I'm reading all this stuff. Now, I do have a distorted perspective because I'm like immersed in it, right? But that is still, where I am is still a possibility, right? Yeah, the United world where they've gone carbon neutral and we're still getting on United planes in 2050, I guess that's possible, right? But so yes, I think what you're saying is, for the most part, unimaginable, but we better start imagining it. Or you won't have any choice but to imagine it. Well, she says, laughing.
So we're talking about coming to terms with the inevitable.
Yes.
Our place on the ecological.
Yeah. And the speed, right? Inevitability, I think we've always been comfortable with. If we're not creationists, right? That, I think we've always, but the speed, like if, I think I went to a talk earlier and someone quoted Wilkerson and the impacts of which will be felt for millennia to come, right? That's true for the planet, right? It's going to be feeling that impact, but whether there's humans for millennia to come, I mean, maybe stateless, that's what I'm like, maybe then it's stateless societies can go on for millennia because Indigenous peoples have lived for millennia, right? Without catastrophic change. So when I'm saying like imagining the end of, just because it's the end of us, right? There's something affirmative about imagining a stateless nomadic society, right? So that's the bright side.
This talk was great. I'm leaving that lane on my notes in front of me, so I'll try to recall. I was struck when you compared the kind of Stoics and living with the knowledge that the time will not be redeemed as the one choice, and the other choice being like when you know you're going to be in the end, you have the way to think about another possible way of living the world. So as I was thinking about that, what immediately came to mind is like the Black radical tradition, and I was wondering to what extent that could be a resource for it, because being like that is what that tradition is thinking. So I feel like I'm interested in thinking about another narrative of romanticism where we place it in like Haiti, we place it in like the American South, thinking about these kind of questions. So I just wondered if you could pick a little.
Yeah. So just to start with Haiti, right? Is that what you? Yeah. So I was trained in 5 white dudes romanticism, right? And like really trained in it. I did my PhD in it. I had no clue about Haiti. No clue. That's how romanticism, right? And then, and I'm teaching it for years, and I'm thinking I'm being cool because I'm including Phyllis Wheatley, and I do some stuff on abolition. You look into it, right? It is my firm belief, like now I said, my firm belief they were all reading Stoicism. Haiti was a huge deal, right? That this could all end. So yes, I mentioned Year Without a Summer, and I mentioned the pandemic. Haiti was, like Wordsworth was writing on Haiti, right? There's that Susan Buck-Morse book, which I think is incredibly convincing. And I remember when that book came out, I was like, it's not, there's nothing there, right? Because no one wants to, right? I think that's a really good point, that something occurs, right? That the world could be very different right now, right? And so when you say the Black radical tradition, that phrase of Césaire that gets quoted by Fanon, that then gets quoted by all the Afro-pessimists, the end of the world, right? The only thing to wish for is the end of the world. And so that is, thank you for asking that, because around this time, I think Haiti is a big deal, right? So there's pandemic death, there's climate death, but also political catastrophe, that is viewed as the opportunity for another world, right? More or less optimistically, I mean, Wordsworth was terrified by it, I think, but that doesn't mean that there wasn't the sense that it did not have to be this way. I think it plays into all the tropes of slavery and bondage that are run through Romanticism. So yes, and up to the present, right? Yeah.
I did see the alcohol start to go over. I'll ask one last question. I said Star Trek, but maybe the question is, why hasn't sci-fi and the imaginary, the contemporary imaginary, especially the science fiction, prepared us better for this? I mean, think about like Frank Herbert, Philip K. Dick, Octavia Butler. I mean, it's all been there. None of this is new. And we've imagined over and over again a human after humans die. And yet we're having this talk. Why is that? Why hasn't that popular imaginary?
Well, I mean, let's take Octavia Butler, right? Because there is, I think it's, you say, why hasn't it? I think when you read it now, and you'll read Parable, so, right, and there's suddenly all of California's on fire, there's a president who wants to make America great again and bring back slavery, right? So it's, I think it was, I mean, we were talking about earlier about Margaret Atwood's like, when I read The Handmaid's Tale, I thought that was going to be great, like I didn't expect. So so that was the first thing. So yes, it's there, and I think a lot of it is read allegorically, right? But just to go, I want to pick up on Octavia Butler, because Lilith's Brood or Xenogenesis trilogy, or however one labels it, there's this moment where she's told, right, humans suck. You've got this hierarchical, violent gene, and we're going to help you, right? You've destroyed the planet, and we're going to help save you, right, with a little bit of genetic modification. And Butler says there's something, and still she wants to hold on to who she is, right? So I think it's more like when you say why haven't they? I think the problem is not imagining the end of the world. I think the more interesting thing in Butler is, but we still want to hold on to who we are, right? And I think there's plenty of imagination of the end of the world and what's like needs work, right? And all those writers are working on, right? Because it's like therapy. It's like, how do you keep saying goodbye to yourself, right? You read more Octavia Butler, you read more N.K. Jemisin. I was doing the same thing. The novel begins, end of the world. What is it, what is it like to live wishing the end of the world? What is it like to keep watching the end of the world? And there's two sorts of that science fiction, right? One is a triumphant form, right, where the world nearly ended and we saved the world, which is what most apocalyptic cultural production now is, right? Is there's always someone who's that. The DiCaprio's the exception, right? Most of them end up with, and they turn the comic around, right? That's why it gets so much attention. I think it's there, but what's interesting is the attempt, like it's there, we read it, and yet we hold it. And I would say my answer to that now, ramble, privatisation, I think, is that it gets turned into a coping, we read science fiction as a sort of coping method for us, instead of thinking it collectively, like saying goodbye to some of the deeply embedded privatised structures we have through knowledge and, imagining climate change. We always imagine it as adjusting it to save who we are rather than confronting the end. So it's there, right? It's just that you can't read too much of it, right? You've got to read more. Keep every year, start of the year. I'm going to reread my Octavia Butler. I'm going to reread my N.K. Jemisin because I keep wanting this world to go on.
well, like I said, the alcohol went that way. And actually, if you go out there, there's a door, you can go down and sit on the patio and just look at the mountains and drink.
That sounds like a nice thing to do.
Actually, I mean, it might be the last thing we do, so, thank you very much.
Thank you.